So a girl ventures out of her comfort zone into the beyond of Hollywood Hills. She encounters another world. That's basically the story of Valley Girl. I'm Josh James Dan Edmonds.
Hi there.
And yeah, I think I had a couple of the usual questions, but more recently, you've come into LA and seen a bit of the the valley and stuff like that. So just kind of, I think the obvious question is, so what were your impressions of the La La Land?
Yeah, well, much like Deborah Foreman, I got out of my comfort zone and went over to the Hollywood Hills. And this was actually the first time me and John actually met up. So
Yes.
it was quite a momentous occasion, really, in real life, that is. So yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed it. It's a very varied kind of place, LA, very different from, I guess, sort of what I expected, because I have played Grand Theft Auto 5. But yeah, I mean, for me, what was interesting to see how the different areas have dealt with COVID, in that you
Mm,
had Santa Monica looked very clean and tidy. Hermosa, Manhattan Beach kind of area looked pretty orderly as well, and Venice was just full of tents of homeless people everywhere. It was pretty bleak, to be honest,
mm,
and you couldn't help but notice that, like, when you were going underneath bridges, things like that, you saw a lot of that. Um, Obviously things weren't a lot of I was going out in the evening on Sunset Strip trying to see what was open, and there wasn't a whole lot at the moment.
mm.
A few things here and there, but when things were open, or when there was something there was a lot of people there. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty close to how I imagined it. Not quite as many 80s heavy metal looking people
Nah,
around, because that's where my sort of vision of the Sunset Strip comes from. But
right.
yeah, it's pretty close to what you'd imagine.
Was there what stood out the most though that was different from what you pictured, imagined?
I guess it was just the kind of the levels of um, how some areas are really nice and some areas
Hmm.
weren't, and it seemed like you could almost
Mm,
go from block, and then the next block
hmm.
down was a bit ropey, and then the next block
Yeah.
was good, and it was, I didn't expect downtown LA to be quite as nice as it was, because
Mm,
some of the bits in between weren't that nice. So
right.
it's so changeable, sort of block to block. I think that was kind of
Yeah.
what surprised me the most about it.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. And I feel like in some ways, everything with COVID has kind of just um, amplified that effect. Like I think before it was there was that kind of unevenness block by block, but I don't think it was as dramatic as it's become. I think that's the thing that's kind of changed.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, I think definitely. What also surprised me was, because I didn't really know this, because I did the touristy stuff, the Walk of Fame, the Chinese
Mhm.
Theater, and I didn't realize that there was no Hollywood studios in Hollywood. It
Right.
was, and that they're all, like, in Burbank or Culver
Hmm.
City and places like that. So that was stuff you don't realize till you get there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's funny that Hollywood itself is really more for the tourists, and all the work that's all shooting and stuff like that. It's all done like kind of just everything around it and stuff. So.
Yeah, and of course we did bump into the odd Valley girl over there, and the stereotype is, well, I don't know, it's obviously changed over the years, but yeah, it's an interesting one. I don't think it's quite like it was in the 80s, and that's probably why the new one isn't quite the same, in a way, or it couldn't do it in a modern day setting. But yeah.
Well, let's get into it. I think
Yeah.
the 1983 version, of course, is the original with the director Martha Coolidge, who's actually more known for music videos,
Mm.
including actually the modern English I'll melt with you, like kind of ironically, like kind of she did their music video as well. It launched the career, of course, of Nicolas Cage, who it's his first appearance as by that name instead of Nicholas Coppola and stuff.
Right.
And it's also like a breakout role for Deborah Foreman. She kind of only gone on to do only a few other roles and stuff, not nearly as big as Nicolas Cage. But I think overall it's you see not only this director capture this time in history, but also
Mm.
the kind of magic of these kind of um, the rising stars, that kind of effect and stuff like that. I think you really see that she's somehow able to really identify, like, hey, these are, up and coming, actors and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, Nicolas Cage is very sort of charismatic in it, in the sort of slightly off kilter punk rocker, but then becomes very sort of infatuated and brings that across in the screen of Deborah Foreman's character. And Deborah Foreman, I think, is really good because she encapsulates, you can tell that she's emotionally invested in Randy as the within as part of the romance, but she keeps a sort of certain nonchalant airheadedness about her, which makes it kind of slightly detached from either what's going on or the events that are happening, that actually makes her very believable as that kind of, as what is the then Valley Girl stereotype, I would say.
Yeah, it's absolutely the case that, like you said, on the one hand, she's kind of has that vapidness that we associate with Valley Girls, but you really see, like, a little bit more of her intelligence, as an actress, but also, I think, apparently they actually went out for a bit, so you really see that chemistry, like, captured on screen, that apparently went off screen as well.
Yeah, and I think it's what was sort of interesting about their romance is that when it sort of all breaks down, you really feel like in this one, she very realistically portrays still trying to be very invested in her society in the valley and her friends there. And it's very believable that she just kind of decides, oh, I don't really know what to do. I'm going to dump him for a bit and see, maybe that's how it's all going to work out. And it feels very natural the way that actually happens. It's
It's funny. It's funny that we actually have seen this formula before. I think that one song, "A Million Miles Away," really captures like kind of this dynamic of kind of these two worlds colliding and stuff. We saw this in Karate Kid, actually. Kind of where a girl from a kind of more well-to-do kind of world meets a this kind of newcomer who's a little bit kind of more from the rougher edges and stuff like that. But the twist here is, like, kind of the the struggle is actually within her, as you said, versus, like, the old boyfriend and stuff. Like, the old boyfriend is tucking and stuff like that, but granted, he gets into things a little bit with Randy, but that's not the real conflict, though. The real conflict is within the Valley Girl.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's interesting about this is the way it's sort of centered around almost like areas of LA, in that you have the sort of someone representing an area, a look, an attitude, music, and you have likewise in the valley representing a completely different sort of take on that. So it's kind of it's quite interesting in that it's not only a sort of clash of characters, but a sort of a clash of cultures that were happening in LA, I guess, in the 80s as well.
Yeah, it's funny that Julie's parents, are actually these hippies, right? That kind of are about the establishment and stuff like that. And they own this health food store, kind of. And so it's at one point she even says, like, "Oh, it's so cool. Why don't they own a Pizza Hut or something?"
Right. I actually really like the scenes with the parents because it's very easy for any kind of coming of age teen kind of romance movie to have very stereotypical parental characters. And because they're sort of like, old hippies, they're trying to be as cool as possible in all of the situations, which is really, it makes for much more, I don't know, it feels more realistic as a result, I think.
It makes more sense that she, wants to fit in more, that's more the pressure, that she wants to just be like a normal kid and stuff like that. Like at one point she even said, like kind of when she's coming from staying out all night, like kind of which, like is, I mean, I don't know about most parents and stuff like that, but I think in general it's kind of like, like just unheard of. And then she even says, like, why don't you punish us like Stacy's parents?
Yeah. But I think that's kind of, I mean, we were down in Hollywood quite late at night and we saw some girls who looked like they were Valley girls just out and about. And there were some people nearby who looked very sketchy. And I don't know, I guess it's just a slightly sort of invincibleness that comes with that, maybe, I don't know.
Maybe.
Kind of, but yeah, the other, I mean, what I thought was also sort of interesting is the way it's made in the way that the whole thing is kind of shot, is that it feels very voyeuristic, I would say, as a movie. It feels like you're kind of spying on teenagers through most of this movie, and not that it's done in any kind of over-the-shoulder Halloween style sort of camera work. It's more just the fact that you're sort of seeing these very personal interactions between the girls, you know, their potential boyfriends and various other things. And then, of course, you've got, right, sort of hitting it on the nose, Nicolas Cage hiding in a bathroom, waiting for the right girl to come in, and then kind of creeps up on her, which is a bit, you know, yeah, you've got to really be fairly charismatic to be able to pull that off. But yeah, so but that was kind of the whole tone of the thing was a bit like that, I felt. But it's done in such a sort of matter-of-fact, realistic way that it's quite compelling to watch, because you do feel like you're sort of seeing a real slice of life from 80s San Bernardino Valley, you know.
Yeah, and I think it's also like a typical thing of these teen movies, right, where it's all about the popularity, like kind of, you know, like and we I guess in some ways kind of talked a little bit about the impact of social media and stuff like that. And it's funny, like, you know, that's another aspect of this that like is very much like you know, the lens of the time that like you know, there's none of that, right? Like there's, you know, we'll talk about that in the 2020 version where they make a reference to like you know, like it's not as though I have a phone that can, you know, like beam across the universe.
Yeah, I know.
But at the same time, you know, the whole thing with popularity is like kind of where the ironic part is that, like, you know, like the one line by Susie where she says, you know, like being popular can be so lonely, you know, and so it's like kind of it is such a key aspect of these teen movies that, like, you know, that it's all about kind of being popular, and it's something that we almost forget about with social media, because that's kind of now become the currency, I guess, if you will, that, like, you know, the likes and you know, the what's called views and stuff like that.
Yeah, your main concerns were you had to look good on the beach, you had to be at the mall with your friends, and you had to get invited to the parties. Those were the three key social interactions, it seems.
Right.
So yeah, the other thing I really thought was interesting in this was the potential kind of I don't know who he was, what the name of the character was, but the mother who was interested in the boy who was also a delivery boy.
That was such a weird kind of, you know, side story and stuff. What did you think of that?
Well, I thought it was interesting, because was she like the girl's stepmother, or was she
apparently yeah, like, because the one time Fred asked, like, you know, oh where's your something about the girl's mother, and she's dead, like, kind of it was like kind of right. That's where, like, kind of really drove home that idea that it's a stepmom and stuff.
Yeah, so that was really interesting for me to see this kind of competition between the daughter and the stepmother for the same guy. That was interesting. And that actually, when you're saying about, asking me about one overriding impression of LA that sort of trumps all others, I didn't think of it earlier, but now I thought of it. It's basically, it's hard to tell how old women are in LA.
Oh, interesting.
Especially as someone my age in their 40s, it's like, the girls who were out looked very young to me, and then anything after that, it was a bit of a crapshoot as to actually how old they were. I really couldn't tell. 30, 40, 50 is very...
Botox does wonders.
Yeah, Botox and trip to lots of plastic surgeons in the area, I guess.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, that was kind of, interesting to see. But
yeah, with that subplot, they definitely made, you know, like, lots of references to The Graduate and stuff, which I didn't really, I guess I'm not sure I see where, I mean, it did have a kind of Graduate kind of ending and stuff like that, granted, but, you know, of course, major spoiler, but at the same time, I'm not sure I saw the real connection, like, beyond that, though, you know, kind of, I don't know.
No, again, this kind of fed into this whole kind of voyeuristic kind of slice of life angle for the movie, and that you know, you saw that all the kids arriving at the party and they all kind of split off, and you saw, you know, her splitting up with her boyfriend, boyfriend then going and trying to get on with another girl, and then that guy went, and now the mother's interested in him. It's kind of it kind of, with that initial party, it actually sort of weaved quite an interesting sort of web of relationships.
Right.
So it's quite cleverly done, I thought.
Yeah, I mean, definitely it made you see, like, kind of how, you know, like, at these parties, right, was, like you said, you know, just the other kind of key aspect of, you know, kind of how they connect, because we I think there's like maybe one or two scenes at the school and stuff, but other than that,
Yeah.
everything's at the, like you said, at the mall, at these
Mm.
parties, or like or in their kind of the girls' bedroom and stuff like that. I mean, that's like kind of where these the worlds are, the social worlds of the girls.
Yeah. And I thought it was really interesting as well, the way that they tried to sort of get Nicolas Cage's character to win her back, because I kind of thought it might end on a kind of a tragic note of them just going their separate ways and never the twain shall meet. But I kind of love this sort of weird sort of prank style way of him trying to win his way back into her good graces. And then
it definitely works with his personality.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just thought the whole sort of ending was quite funny as well, the way he just like beats up the school sort of big man on campus, and that's it, done, job done. I can see why in our more sort of political correct times it's not so good for some sort of heavy metal dude just to come and lay out the popular guy and just like, hey man, I'm taking my girl with me kind of approach. It's not really, not so many of those kind of stories anymore, but yeah.
Well, let's call it shall we kind of talk about the remake?
Yeah, let's dive on into the 2020 remake. Oh god.
So before we dive into that, one of the questions that I had or thought about asking was, like kind of, and I feel like we're going to talk. We hinted at it with the 42nd Street stuff, but what is it like, kind of with musicals, and when does it work and when doesn't? When doesn't it?
Quite often, musicals don't work, in my opinion. There's not many musicals. I would almost prefer. I'm trying to think now. There's very few musicals I actually really enjoy. I just like the classics. Modern ones always feel very kind of shoehorned, and things like La La Land and Rock of Ages and all this kind of stuff. No, I'm just not into it. And this one is especially bad because the original was interesting because it's quite intelligently written, voyeuristic kind of peek behind the scenes of what life is like in the Valley in the 80s. This is kind of like, well, we can't do that these days because it's all just going to be lots of people reading their cell phones and stuff like this. So instead, they've gone to try and make this hyper-realized musical remake of what life might have been like in the 80s, according to the makers of this movie. So at every given opportunity, people break into some sort of acoustic version, or I don't know it's not acoustic, is it? It's when it's just the a cappella. Yeah.
Okay.
It's like an a cappella version of some famous 80s song. And then they do it during like a workout regime or anything. It's just really, really irritating the way they just crowbar them into every possible opportunity in this movie.
I will say that I definitely agree for like a lot of the the first parts of the movie. It was just kind of like not only cringeworthy, but like you said, it felt like kind of like really forced and stuff like that. I felt that like they did a really good job for the finale and everything. That worked for me. Like kind of so like I almost like overlook what was the past sins because of how well like kind of the last couple of numbers worked and stuff like that.
Okay. Yeah, no. None of the numbers worked for me. I just found them all intensely irritating. And I was just saying to John before we started, this took me about 3 attempts to get through the Valley Girl 2020. And I was just there going, oh, don't make Under Pressure the last. Oh no, don't ruin this one as well. And I mean, I think what was annoying about it was that it's just it becomes a very cliched story. It doesn't have any of the kind of odd warts and all approach of the original. There's no kind of strange stepmother daughter trying to win the heart of this boy, and you don't see the sort of slightly dodgier style of the original boyfriend, where he's trying to coerce that one of her friends into having sex with him in the original party. It shows him as a particularly seedy kind of character.
Yeah.
Although having said that, Logan Paul was quite entertaining in this, actually.
I mean, he definitely like kind of makes like I don't know how he is as a YouTube personality and stuff like that, because I really don't follow him, but he really comes across as a douchebag that like you really root for not to get the girl and stuff like that.
Yeah.
At least for me.
I mean, I know him from his various sort of boxing tournaments that he's put online, and I guess he bought a Pokemon card, and he also didn't he report on a place where somebody committed suicide in Japan or something? That was the one I remember.
Apparently, that's why like this movie kind of stalled for quite a while, like being finished up and stuff like that, and just kind of I guess they finally like with the pandemic they're like, well, if we're gonna release it, we'll do it now.
Yeah, but I mean, they made his character so one-dimensional, unlike the original one, who was far more manipulative. So that was a shame. In fact, that was really the problem. It was kind of like, yeah, we'll just make lots of kind of cliched characters, but it'll be all right because we're going to have lots of songs to keep people's attention all the way through it. Having said that, though, I thought actually most of the actors did a pretty decent job. I thought Josh Whitmore as Randy was pretty good. Julie, I'm not sure what.
Jessica Rothe. So she's actually, we'll see her again in Happy Death Day when we do the Groundhog Day, kind of unofficial remakes and stuff.
Oh, cool. Okay. Yeah, she was good, actually, considering it was such a terrible movie. She actually did quite a good job. And
that's the thing I was going to ask you about too. Like, what did you feel about kind of the chemistry? Like kind of because as we know, like kind of with Deborah Foreman and kind of Nicolas Cage, they actually ended up going out and stuff. But here in this case, it's purely a on-screen romance and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it was, I guess, serviceable for the for the movie. I mean, he looked a bit too pretty and clean to be from, what they were trying to. Yeah, I mean, Nicolas Cage was much more believable in that respect. And actually, his, makes you appreciate how good an actor Nicolas Cage is actually when you saw him in that role, because he really is. He comes across with a, really sincere in a lot of the sort of romantic scenes and things. So, yeah. Whereas this it kind of just felt a little bit, it felt like a kind of a Disney show aimed at teenagers, basically. In fact, I would say
that, yeah.
Some of the musical Disney shows like The Descendants are actually considerably better than Valley Girl, I would say. And the songs and dance routines are much better. So if you really feel like a musical number, I can heartily recommend Descendants 2 and 3 if you really need to see, teenagers dancing around. So...
This one had quite a few like interesting cameos. They had just about each of the major casts from the original kind of pop up in various places, like almost for like split seconds and stuff. Like of course the original Julie is kind of in the dress shop just for that kind of moment, just to say kind of, oh, you look stunning, dear, kind of. E.G. Daily is Mrs. Bowen. so it's kind of like I guess a little bit of a twist at where she's
just to correct you, yeah, she said you look bitchin'.
Okay.
In the dress shop, because that's the whole thing. Everyone's like,
yeah,
this is bitchiness, and this was the bitchiness party or whatever. So I thought that was quite good. Yeah.
And so what's it called? One cameo I did have to kind of I feel like I have to mention though was the Les Nessman Richard Sanders as a driver's ed teacher. He was only there for a moment in the original movie, but it was a funny sequence where Julie's busy talking and distracted driving and stuff like that. And so it's like freaking him out. And I guess Richard Sanders he does a great job of like this guy kind of who's normally very calm, but when he freaks out and stuff.
Yeah. What did you think of the whole Alicia Silverstone as the
that was interesting. It's surreal because I'm so used to her, seeing her. In my mind, she's still, what's it called?
Clueless?
Yeah, from Clueless and stuff.
Right,
which actually, that's a unofficial remake of Emma, which we may do sometime and stuff like that. But I still see her as Elle. I mean, it's so hard to see her in this role of a mom and stuff like that. I almost feel like I couldn't quite like she she does a great job with her serviceable job and all that, but it's just really hard to see her in that role.
Again, for me, it kind of it was their way of justifying making it hyper real and just throwing in songs and everything else. because it's kind of like her, you know, glamorized memory of the time rather than a realistic depiction. But still, it didn't really work for me. And it just pulled me out of the movie because they were just going backwards and forwards. But yeah.
And I think that's another interesting question too, is that like when we do these kind of films that like are retro and stuff like that, but we're trying to like, you know, look at it with the modern lens, a modern sensibility, stuff like that. You know, at what point do we kind of like draw the line? Like for me, shows like Mad Men, whatever, they do it in a way that like it works into the story that like basically all they're doing is like kind of through the story showing you aspects of, you know, like kind of how things were, like, you know, like whether it's the sexism or about like kind of discrimination, stuff like that. They just simply show it. They don't like editorialize. And I feel like sometimes some of these modern movies, they all like to try to go, oh, but you know, like kind of this is more our kind of PC way of looking, you know, or a modern way of looking at those times and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, there was nothing particularly objectionable in terms of anyone in this. It was a very clean cut kind of movie, really.
That's what I'm saying. Like kind of, it's
totally
almost like
sanitized.
Yeah, you know, I feel like it's kind of, you know, all the froth. Like this is the comment that I thought about when as I was watching it. It was it's all the froth of the '80s without any of the biases or like kind of the fear of like kind of, you know, the bombs coming off. I mean, granted, in the original, none of that kind of really comes across, but you do feel like that there's this kind of part of this. The times was like kind of, you know, like in some ways maybe like the Valley Girls thing was like kind of just, oh, like everything, like they're oblivious to it, and then meanwhile in the, you know, the Hollywood Hills and stuff like that, there's this kind of like they're kind of getting ready for the apocalypse. They kind of like, you know, like the punk rockers and stuff like that, right? Like, you know, they feel like they know kind of what's really going on and stuff, and you know, like kind of people on the other side of the valley are clueless and stuff like that.
Well, I think the original Valley Girl is basically, it just shows you a big sort of social inequality, you know, divide in LA itself, which is obviously a trend that has been continuing ever since, really. So it's, I mean, in a way, yeah, you could have carried on that with a modern day version of it, you know, rather than trying to sort of make a hyper real 80s retro, you know, member berry or whatever they call them. But yeah, I mean, for me, I remember I was just listening to, because obviously I was in LA, I had to listen to Appetite for Destruction by Guns N' Roses. And what was refreshing about that at the time is you had a lot of hair metal bands that were sort of saying, hey, rock and roll's cool and there's lots of girls and everything. But that sort of album goes through and sort of says, you know, well, you know, it's great taking drugs, but now I'm kind of like really strung out and I'm, you know, I'm really in trouble now. And so it was, what was clever about it was they kind of showed both sides. And I kind of feel, you know, that was a little bit what you felt in the original Valley Girl. It was, you know, it wasn't all glitz and glamour. And yeah, that's just not what the 2021 was at all. But it shows you there was, you know, I think that's what kind of annoyed me was that in the 80s, you knew that not everything was kind of like amazingly polished and marvelous and wonderful. You knew there was a bad side to things as well. So it seems particularly unrealistic to portray it in that way, I'd say. But
yeah, I think, you know, like you kind of sort of saying that like what they kind of tried to do, or the way they tried to get around it, was the fact that like this is Alicia, you know, Silverstone, you know, kind of you know, almost like rosy colored glasses view of, you know, like kind of her memories of that time, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I guess that's like kind of where they kind of took poetic license to a degree. At the same time, though, like it's interesting how like it felt like that they really wedged in this kind of female empowerment kind of, you know, theme and stuff, like where, you know, again, that's like kind of in some ways like the stuff we talked about with Black Christmas, where it's like,
well, because she makes the decision, doesn't she, to get rid of Mickey and go with Randy at the end, basically. So yeah, she's the one who makes that decision rather than Nicolas Cage going in and punching someone. She's there sort of saying, yeah, forget it, Mickey, I'm going to go with Randy instead at the end. So yeah, you're right, they've changed him.
And it's also like that the whole idea was that it's more about her choosing her way. Like they had the kind of Kodak moment where the dad's like kind of watching Sally ride, riding off in the space shuttle and stuff. And so he's kind of making this comment about, oh, like I bet her parents was scared, but she's they're proud of her now. Like kind of it's like kind of like almost like again giving her permission to kind of choose her course and that kind of thing.
Yeah, there's part of me that, and this just shows you how out of touch with this movie I was. I thought they were going to show the Columbia disaster.
I know, that's what I thought too. I thought the same thing.
And I thought, wow, this is going to take a really dark turn all of a sudden. This movie. Because I couldn't remember if it were like that was the
that's the one, yeah.
So obviously not, but yeah. I mean, I guess you have to ask yourself, okay, it's kind of through rose-tinted glasses, this whole movie. But do I really want to watch Alicia Stone's rose-tinted memories of the 80s for 2 hours? Not really, to be honest, would be my approach to this.
Yeah, I mean, in hindsight, the seeing like kind of the Challenger explosion would have been kind of more darkly humorous, or kind of like would have woken you up at that point before the ending and stuff like that.
Yeah, I don't want to spoil it, but there was one bit I've just watched Black Widow. Obviously, we're being timely here, and there was one part which I won't spoil for everyone, but it wasn't supposed to be funny, but was inadvertently by far the funniest part of that movie. Okay. But I won't. But yeah, I'll let people watch it and decide for themselves. But yeah, there was really nothing inadvertently funny about Valley Girl 2020, and there wasn't, and really nothing intentionally funny about it. Really, I would say. Yeah.
I mean, I think overall, it's one of those remakes that you kind of really wonder, like why did they make it?
I know. Yeah.
I mean, that's what it comes down to.
I guess they just thought, oh, well, Stranger Things was about the 80s. Let's try and make another movie about the 80s. We'll put some pretty people in, or throw some songs in. It's kind of one of those things where we know people like these things. Let's just throw them all in and see if it works. And it didn't. I mean, I think as well, though, we've said this before about other sort of retro stuff and why Stranger Things works and others don't, is because the story isn't about the 80s. The story could be set in any time period. It just happens to be there, and it gives them the excuse to throw these things in.
Right.
But this was, I mean, I suppose you could say it's true about this. This could be a bad cliched teen romance in any decade, really, and just happened to be set in the 80s. But
because it was Valley Girl, right? Like, so they kind of were just taking that as the template for doing this musical number and stuff, and it just, I mean, it could have worked, but in this case, it was kind of like. really felt like kind of just forced and stuff. I mean, I have to admit, I mean, like I said, I mean, for me, like the end, numbers kind of, was kind of done well. I think that's the thing that really strikes me more, like kind of, but unfortunately, I think I can see from your point of view though that like at that point, like did you really care by then? Like, or did you even make it to that part because of all like kind of you had to kind of get through and stuff? And I mean, I have to admit that like if I didn't have like I actually really enjoyed the original movie so much that like I look forward to like kind of seeing how this remake, what they did with it, so like that. So that was my motivation to see it. Other of course in our discussion, and like kind of, but I guess it's for me is like kind of just other than that. It's just again like one of those movies that like just you just kind of wonder like what were they really thinking, like kind of like, why did they really even come up with the ideas like that?
I mean, it's in a way, as I say, they could have done a much more grittier real life sort of slice of life thing, much like in the same style as the original, and it would have been, you could have actually made a really interesting movie, but no. Yeah, I mean, if it wasn't for us doing this talk, I would have probably switched it off at the half an hour point, to be honest. It took a lot of willpower to restart that as well, to be honest.
I'll tell you, after that first number, I kind of like, go, oh my God, if this is going to be the whole movie, this is going to be painful.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, I guess, on to the next one.
So coming up, we'll be definitely, of course, talking about the Handmaid's Tale. It's just been such a controversial series, and yeah, for many different reasons, of course. We will also look at the Teenage Ninja Mutant Turtles, which actually there's I think a funny connection to Valley Girl, which we'll kind of discuss there. It should be interesting.
Okay.
So yeah, once again, I'm John Chang with Dan Evans. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you at the movies.